But can we say that maybe Highland Park is a bit more expensive than others because of that expensive cask that enters the maturation process?
Technically speaking, you could, but remember it's all relative to how many millions of litres of spirit a distillery is turning out year after year. What I'd say is if you look at Highland Park and you look at the price points for Highland Park, pretty much across America, it's one of the most reasonable value propositions when it comes to single malt. All we're doing is making a beer solution. We're boiling it twice and then putting it in a wooden cask to age, to mature. That's the simple version. The longer, more involved version is this, and I'll try and keep it very short. We will soak barley, we'll steep barley in water. It'll be a very large tank, several tons of barley, and that'll last for about 3 days. Then we lay the wet barley out on the stone floor of the distillery. This is called floor malting. It'll be turned every 6 hours for approximately 7 days. That keeps the barley from getting too dry, but also tricks it into growing. At the end, the barley has little green shoots that are sprouting on it, which we call green malt. That will then be transported up to the floor of the kiln so it can be dried. At this point, we use that Arcadian peat and we'll burn it for about 17 hours to smoke the barley and give the flavour. Then, to dry it, we'll use what's called coking coal. That's a type of smokeless coal, which will dry the barley but not contribute any more smoke flavour. At that point, we put it into what's called a mash tun. All we're doing at this point is introducing 3 different temperatures of hot water, and that extracts soluble sugar into the liquid. We call that wort. So the next step is where we make that beer-like solution. Now, normally when you're making a beer, you introduce yeast and hops. We don't do that. We do introduce some yeast, but we're not precious with it the way a brewer would be, because we're not trying to make a true beer. What we do is we put it into a large tank called a washback. It's about 12 foot deep. And all that wort goes in, along with some water, and along with the yeast. And eventually it becomes a substance called wash. It's about 7% alcohol by volume. They'll tell you it's like beer. Don't ever drink it if you visit the distillery. It's not that pleasant. Now, when we have that substance, we're then going to put it into what's called the wash still. We'll use a wash still and we'll use a spirit still. That wash liquid, that's what we call it now, goes into the wash still first. And what we use is a short copper still. It's very, very fat on the bottom, so the liquid has lots of exposure to the heat source. Remember, if we used a column still, something narrower and something taller, then we're going to get a thinner vapour and as a result, a thinner alcohol. Generally speaking, if there's a very small amount of exposure to the heat source, you're not going to get all the vapours and alcohol out of the liquid. So into this little wash still, it's copper still, it goes right up to a very narrow point. What we're doing as we're increasing the heat is the alcohol vapours rise up, separating from the water. It goes through a cooling pipe and it comes out as a liquid, which we call low wines. What happens next is the really exciting part. We put it into what's called the spirit still, and I think the name implies everything that it does. In the spirit still, a similar shape to the wash still, again a copper still, a very wide bottom. This is where it intensifies in alcohol. The heat rises, the vapours come up as alcohol, go through a cooling pipe, and it's at this point we're selecting the liquid that's going to go into the casks and eventually become single malt Scotch. There are 3 parts to this process, and every distillery follows them. There's heads, middle, and tails, or alternatively, 4 shots, hearts, and feints. The 4 shots we don't want to put in a cask. I've been told before they're too brash, too lemony, they're not going to succeed as single malt in a cask. It will please you to know those get recycled in the next run. In the heart of the run, the middle, we take a very small amount. Now, some distilleries vary the percentage, but for Highland distillers, for both Macallan and Highland Park, it's a tiny amount that comes out of the heart of the run. And that's what will go in to our expensive casks. At the very end, you have the feints. And that's what the name implies. They're much lighter, much softer. Again, they will get recycled. And that's the process. Now, what we've taken out in the heart of the run goes up to anything from 60 to 70% alcohol by volume. It's much more intense. And then it goes to a filling station where we'll put that liquid into our casks. So that's from the grain through to the liquid that will eventually become the whiskey. That's how we make the new make spirit.
If I take the example of the 18-year-old Highland Park, can I be safe saying, well, you know, this was for so many years in this type of barrel, and then it spent another few years in in other type? Or
I
how
should
does it
probably
work?
clarify. What will happen is this is 45% first fill sherry oak barrels, and then the rest are refill sherry barrels. No matter what happens, every cask will be a minimum of 18 years old. There'll be nothing younger than that, because whiskey, according to the law, and indeed to be called proper Scots whiskey, it has to be corresponding to the age on the bottle. There's nothing younger there. It's the youngest by law that's on the bottle and on the pack. So there could be older Highland Park, but there'll be no younger. In terms of how you're putting them together, you're starting at that cut-off point for age, and then it's a minimum of 45% first fill Highland Park barrels, then 55% refill Highland Park barrels. That's how we find the footprint of flavour, and really that's down to the skill and quality of our master blender or whiskey maker to put the whiskey together consistently. Again, remember, we're using first fill and refill in tandem for our 12, 15, 18 and 25. When you go to the 30, 40 and 50, it's all refill barrels, which gives you a gentler, more delicate spirit.
Is the 50 available in the US?
It is indeed in limited quantity, but the US has proven to be the thirstiest market, and we're already on to our second and third year allocations. It really is truly remarkable. It's a fantastic whiskey, and while it might not be an everyday purchase for connoisseurs, ultimately it exists for those few that dare to dream. What we found is, and this is something that I'm particularly proud of, all of the bottles that have been sold, to the best of my knowledge, have already been consumed. And I think that's tremendously important. We wouldn't want it to sit on a shelf gathering dust. Sadly, no one invited me to those bottle opening parties, but I already secreted some away for myself, so I think I'm fine.
You know what I'm offering you now? Because I'm one of those nice guys, is to give you a taste of the Highland Park 18 here.
Right.
Because we need to judge whether what you're saying is right or not.
And to think that we're in the brandy library, and I thought I'd get paid with those lovely fluffy gougères, those wee cheese puffs that they have, which I come back for religiously. Well, I guess I'll have to take it.
And I'm sorry you have to taste that Highland Park 18 again.
You know, it's going to be such a difficult task. It's so onerous. I can't imagine how I'll get through it. Please allow me.
Thank you, Martin.
There we are. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pour for myself as well.
Now, obviously, you know my taste because it's a nice generous amount. And I was told that the Scots were quite stingy. Obviously, not in the case of Highland Park.
I think it's safe to say, having just been back in Scotland very briefly, you can see a level of Scottish optimism which wasn't present when I lived in the country. I actually at one point saw about 15 different convertible sports cars all in the midst of a Scottish summer, all driven by Scottish people, which was evident by the paleness of their skin. A lot of people say the Scottish people are tight-fisted and very pessimistic, but anyone that can afford a convertible that's Scottish and lives in Scottish weather, I think you have to say that's a triumph of optimism and positive thinking. Billy Connolly, the Scottish comedian, had a great joke where he said that the only reason that copper wire exists in the world is because you Scotsmen were fighting over a penny, and they eventually wound it down to nothing. Cheers.
Cheers. Slanjva.
Slanjva.
Still a favorite.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. It's something that
you know it, and you know this is a great favorite of our customers because our librarians here love it very much.
I must say that the reaction that people have
so rich,
incredibly rich. It just fills the mouth,
but not overwhelming.
Oh, not at all. Because remember, you're getting a balance of 2 to 4 parts per million phenolic content, 45% first fill sherry barrels. The richness, the flavour. Some people talk about toffee or almonds. Some people talk about chocolate or orange. To me, all of those are valid. What I love is the fact that no matter what happens, when you open a bottle of this, people tend to be united in their appreciation of it. And that's something I'm tremendously grateful to people for. Right. The people at work, ceaselessly, both at the distillery and at the bottling plant, are really following the footsteps of all the pioneers that made Highland Park what it is. And it's incredible to be able to share it with people and for it to have the position that it has and to be so well regarded. And quite frankly, I'll drink to that. You know? Cheers again.
Cheers. Everything's here.
Yeah. I mean,
it's so well balanced.
What we found is that a lot of people initially are quite scared of the category in single malt, and they're often looking for recommendations, or they want someone to reassure them that they're making the right purchase. And we've found the success we've had, particularly in high-end liquor stores, where they're very knowledgeable staff who come to trainings and who go to Scotch events, generally like to recommend a Highland Park because of that balance of sweet and smoke. You have a little bit of everything that makes Scotch great. Now, I drink a lot of smoky whiskies, and I drink a lot of sweet whiskies as well, and everything else in between. So for me, to have something that sits on that fine line and has a balance is truly remarkable. And it's testament to the skill of the people that are making Highland Park day after day, that it can be so consistent.
To the Highland Park workers.
Indeed.